With this invocation, I would like to welcome all of you to this conference, Strengthening Democracy in Asia, Participation, Inclusion, Rights, organized by Institute of Social Sciences, ADN, Asia Democracy Network, and World Movement for Democracy. This morning, we are blessed to have amongst us His Holiness the Dalai Lama, a symbol of compassion, peace, love, and freedom. May I now invite Dr. George Matthew, Chairman, Institute of Social Sciences, to give the welcome address.
Our institute was started 30 years ago. When I told George in 1984 about establishing an institution where intellectuals and activists can meet, he readily encouraged me. Since then, all these years, George has been a friend, philosopher, and guide of the institute. And remembering his great service to the people of this country, we have begun this occasion, and it will continue for generations to come. Friends, very briefly, for those who are new to this area, let me say a few words about George. George Fernandes, eldest of 6 children, was born on June 3, 1930. After completing his high school from St. Aloysius School in Mangalore, he was sent to Bangalore in 1946 to be trained as a priest. He left the seminary and began to work organizing exploited workers in the road transport industry and in the hotels and restaurants in Mangalore. In 1949, George moved to Bombay. He had to sleep on the streets of Bombay until he got a job as a proofreader in a newspaper. Then he came in contact with the trade unionists and socialist leaders, especially Ram Manohar Lohia. He rose to prominence as a trade unionist and fought for the rights of laborers and became a central figure in the unionization of sections of Bombay, dock workers and others, and many workers' strikes were organized by George in the 1950s and the 60s. George was first elected to Parliament in 1967 from Bombay. As president of the All India Railwaymen's Federation, he led the railway strike involving 1.5 million workers in 1974, resulting in thousands of people being sent to jail. George went underground challenging the political emergency. In 1976, he was arrested. Being in prison was nothing new to George. And in 1977, when the emergency was lifted, he was elected from Bihar and became the member of parliament and union minister for industries. Celebrating the 60th year, VP Singh, former Prime Minister of India, released 3 volumes under the general title Dignity for All. Dignity for All. That was on 12th April 1991. George was 9 times Member of Parliament and held several ministerial portfolios, including communications, industry, railways, and defense. He had the courage of conviction, and his fighting spirit stood him in good stead. George Fernandes made extraordinary impact on Indian politics, society, and the international political scene. Having acquired a proficiency in 10 languages, George is also literally gifted and has published numerous books. Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you all to this extraordinary international conference. Thank you very much.
And now I would like to invite Mr. Carl Greshman, President, National Endowment for Democracy, longtime activist and supporter of human rights and democracy worldwide. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. And welcome to all of you this morning. I want to pay a special welcome to Ambassador Chung Tien from Taiwan, and a very special welcome. We have with us this morning three of George Fernandes's 4 brothers, Paul, Michael, and Louis. Please stand up. This conference was originally planned with our friend George Matthew on the theme of the legacy of George Fernandes, which is a legacy of impassioned struggle for political freedom and social and economic justice. George, as you've heard, was a trade unionist, a brilliant orator, an impassioned and committed socialist leader who, when the emergency was declared in 1975, he went underground to lead the struggle for the restoration of democracy, and then he was arrested on June 10th, 1976. When, after the emergency, and George emerged and became Minister of Communications and later Minister of Industry, he said something that I think defined his philosophy. Those of us, he said, who had the honor and the privilege of fighting for what we believed was right and against what we knew was wrong, hold the view that what we went through was a struggle between truth and falsehood, between justice and injustice, between democracy and dictatorship. As we planned this meeting, the idea of the conference evolved from a tribute to George into a discussion of ways to strengthen democracy throughout Asia. And this is consistent with George's record as a great democratic internationalist. He benefited from the solidarity of others. And when he was arrested, immediately after he was arrested, 3 great socialist leaders, Willy Brandt, Olof Palme, and Bruno Kreisky, issued a statement which George felt saved his life. And so George was somebody who not only benefited from international solidarity, but he never hesitated to give international solidarity to others. His home, when he was defense minister between 1998 and 2004, and beyond that, but his home, even at that time, was the headquarters of a Burmese student exile movement that was fighting for democracy. As defense minister, his home was the headquarters for the Burmese exile student movement. And he was India's best friend of the Dalai Lama and its strongest advocate for the human, religious, and national rights of the Tibetan people. I'll never forget when we organized the founding assembly of the World Movement for Democracy here in India, and the Indian government wavered on whether or not to give its consent to His Holiness speaking at the opening of the World Movement for Democracy, George was very, very angry. And he fought within his government to get them to change their position on whether or not the Dalai Lama could speak at the World Movement. And then he came himself and delivered an impassioned speech, I remember that, where he not only talked about Asia, he talked about the Slansky trials in Czechoslovakia in 1952. He was really a great internationalist. And there is no one, I think, in the world who more appreciates George Fernandes and his struggle than His Holiness the Dalai Lama. When we were standing outside before and His Holiness met George's three brothers, he said, well, you're his real brothers, his physical brothers, but I am his spiritual brother. So it's really an extraordinary pleasure and a privilege for me now to introduce this great voice for world harmony and human freedom, His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
Respected elder brothers and rest of brothers and sisters. The brothers and sisters who gathered here, I think some special brothers and sisters, you committed not only your own sort of well-being, but you see, taking the care of millions of other people. So I really appreciate your feeling, and then also more important, you committed these sort of ideas. But it is quite easy, you say very nice thing, but doing nothing. That quite often you see happen. But I think you see people here, I think you really committed yourself. Then on special also the occasion, George Fernandes, long time my friend. I'm one of admirer of him. I remember during his also he as a defense minister, one occasion, he invited his own residents. I think you were there. So we had lunch. Then after lunch, I enter his toilet. So some clothes or some sheets, you see, to wash, you see, just piling there. Then I felt, you see, as a socialist, I think it seems he managed his own home, you see, by himself. So I don't know. I think you know better. So anyway, as such person, again, as I mentioned earlier, he actually dedicate what he believed, no matter how difficult it is. So I really admire. And then beside that, he also very, very sort of say sympathetic, or not only sympathetic, but he often, you see, mention about our difficulties, like that. So I feel till my death, his face always very close in my heart. As a Buddhist, our unique sort of very special sort of friendship. You see, may carry even next life. When I say my next life, indeed, because of the and the deep sort of mind, maybe I'll remember him. So then during emergency, some problem, and also Jayaprakash Narayan, his physical, I think, much worsened, physical condition much worsened. That period, soon after, so they changed the situation. I call him a partner, his own home. Then his physical, very bad. I think that's the last meeting. Again, one great sort of leader of this country. Soon after 59, I came, he organized Afro-Asian Conference. This is regarding, you see, our problem. So then about democracy. I think firstly, I may should have mentioned, when I meet some of the Indian friends, many occasions, I mentioned, although India already got independence, but still India need the certain sort of, how to say, determination and self-confidence and fearlessness. You see, that still need in this country. So he, one of them, really wonderful. You see, sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, you see, sometimes the people get some high position. Then they are a little bit changed. That also I noticed, you see, some my friend, you see, during their with the position, something, a very dignified person, after retired, doesn't mean like that. But same human being. So you see, sometimes you see power and sort of also the position easily spoil. He not like that, I feel. Of course, you see, among Tibetan, majority of them Buddhist, or some small percentage Muslim, and then a few Christians, and some non-believer. So, you see, different tradition, I mean, these different religion, different tradition, so different concept, I cannot say, because of generalize. But as far as Buddhism is concerned, as I mentioned earlier, then furthermore, the monk's rule in Vinaya, about 100 precepts. Precept, no, not precept, some kind of rule, or how to dismiss, how to accept, like that. About 100 rules. So all 100 must carry a group of monk, bhikshu, at least 5 bhikshus. Otherwise, no matter how sort of important, like me, one individual monk, you see, cannot carry this work. Only group of monk. So the democratic sort of principle is there. Then also, you see, we fully committed about, you see, I think modernization, including democracy. I think I may mention over 400 years about 400 years, Dalai Lama institution also take the both responsibility, temporal and spirituality. Since 5th Dalai Lama, this practice started. Since my childhood, I saw a lot of drawbacks with regent. Then say I develop conclusion. The power in few people's hand. So that's mistake. So then 1950, I took the responsibility, political responsibility. Then soon, I think around 1952-53, I set up reform committee. So start some reform, but not very successful because of the circumstances. Then only after 59, when we reach India, at once I start some work more democratic way. Then 2001, we already achieved elected political leadership. Then my position is a semi-retired position. Now 2011, I totally now retired. No political responsibility. So Lobsang Sangay, elected political leadership. So as far as sort of political matter is concerned, he is my boss. Age-wise, much younger. But then, because of this system, elected sort of leader, so I must respect like that. However, the spiritual side, I'm his boss. Like that. So, my retirement, 2011, not only myself retired, but 4th century old tradition. Dalai Lama institution automatically become head of both temporal spirituality. Now that formally, happily, voluntarily ended. So sometimes I jokingly say, telling my friend, if 5th Dalai Lama reappear, whether he agree or not, I doubt. But I have no worry. Now he never will come. Past is past.
Wonderful. Please, yes. Can we have the mic up here, please?
I think the question is, I think real sort of message of religions, truthful, honest, love. So love means respect other. So the democracy also, you see, very much connected with respect other and love other, sense of concern of others' well-being. The totalitarian dictators just think their own interest or small circles sort of interest. So lack of compassion, lack of tolerance. So all major religious tradition actually, you see, teach us love, compassion, forgiveness, tolerance. Like that. Okay.
And now it's my very, very great pleasure to call upon my good friend, the Sikyong, the elected political leader of the Central Tibetan Administration, Lobsang Sangay.
His Holiness Karl Gershman, George, and all the dignitaries and participants and experts and activists for world movement for democracy. It's a great privilege and honor to be here and to say a few words about the legendary George Fernandes being a true and rare friend of Tibet. Before that, I would just like to mention, because this is a conference on strengthening democracy in Asia. And I was put in a very difficult position when His Holiness mentioned that I was his political boss. As we all know, spirituality is more powerful than politics. Anyway, I have a term limit, and His Holiness is our leader for life. And also, actually, His Holiness just mentioned, in true sense of the word, His Holiness is a true democrat, because from the 5th Dalai Lama all the way to 14th Dalai Lama, all the Dalai Lamas have always been both the spiritual and political leader. And in 1959, when he came to India, he introduced democracy, and then we had our own parliamentary election in 1960. And in 1963, His Holiness felt that we need women representation in the parliament. So in 1963, we had women representation in the parliament, perhaps far ahead of even Western countries, including Switzerland, who had women representation only in 1970s. So all the way till 2001, we had democratic election. But also in 1963, a constitution was introduced in exile, because we had just lost our country and we've been in exile only for 4 years. But His Holiness introduced a constitution in which His Holiness mandated a provision which says that His Holiness the Dalai Lama could be impeached by the parliament. Now at that particular time, who would have thought of impeaching His Holiness the Dalai Lama? But His Holiness insisted that provision has to be in the constitution, because everybody has to be servant to the constitution, to the democracy, including His Holiness the Dalai Lama. There was a lot of resistance from the Tibetans, but still His Holiness insisted. And as His Holiness explained in 2001, he declared himself semi-retired and handed over major authority to the elected leader, Kalun Tripa. And in 2011, when His Holiness declared that he will fully retire from politics and he's going to separate the political authority from the spiritual authority, Tibetans were very nervous, and appeals and petitions from all over the world, including a special meeting was convened, where His Holiness was appealed again and again not to devolve his political authority, but we wanted him, and still want him, to continue as both the spiritual and political authority. But His Holiness again insisted the time has come for Tibetan people to take responsibility, and he separated the spiritual authority from political authority. Now in this day and age, where you see a lot of leaders resisting from giving up their power, that caused a lot of bloodshed around the world. We see it even now. But His Holiness is one of the very rare leaders who willingly, as he says, happily and magnanimously, if I add, gave up his political authority in 2011. And he showed an example to the leaders around the world that you can devolve your political authority and let people mature and embrace democracy. And in my humble position, I'm given the political responsibility, but like me, for 6 million Tibetans around the world, His Holiness is the most revered leader even today. And he is our revered boss all the time. And that applies to all the Buddhists around the world and all the democracy activists around the world. In that sense, His Holiness is a true democrat. And remembering legendary George Fernandes, he is also a democracy activist and also a great friend of Tibetan people. I think I'm quoting George Fernandes here. I'm not suggesting that you all do this. So when Tibet was occupied and His Holiness and 80,000 Tibetans had to flee from Tibet to India, so George Fernandes was in Mumbai. Then he was so agitated, he called some of his friends to go and submit a memorandum at the Chinese consulate in Mumbai. He called the consulate and said, "We are coming here with a petition." Then finally, when the day came to submit the petition, from few people, it turned out to be 1,000 people who went to the Chinese consulate in Mumbai. But then when they reached there, The door, the windows, everything was shut. And then when he realized that the council will not be open, they're not going to accept the memorandum. So he shouted a few times, then he got the loudspeaker, shouted a few times. Then finally he thought, okay, he got this idea because he saw some officials sneaking out from the window. So he sent one of his friends to collect a lot of eggs and another friend to get a portrait of Mao Zedong. Now, I'm not recommending you do this. And then obviously they did what they had to do. And then the George Fernandes, the mentor, as you mentioned, Manohar Lohia, he said, that's a stupid mistake you made, George, for doing that. But then the Chinese government sent a protest letter to the Indian government saying, we have heard the sentiments of the Chinese people, so we need an unconditional apology from the Indian government. The Pandit Nehru at that time wrote back to Chou En-lai. He said, look, I am a Prime Minister of India, but we have a political party system. This George Fernandes and the political party is a different party, so I have no control over them. Chou En-lai wrote back and said, I don't give a damn about your political party system, but I want an unconditional apology. Otherwise, for 100 years, we will neither forgive and forget you. And that day, George Fernandes said, I had to take side, and I had to take the side of His Holiness Dalai Lama for good. So since that day, George Fernandes regarded himself as a true friend of His Holiness Dalai Lama and true friend of the Tibetan people. Now, I think there are many Tibetans in this room. On behalf of all the Tibetans, I can say he's not just a true but a rare friend. Whenever we are in trouble here in Delhi, we used to have plenty of troubles. When we were in Delhi College, we used to go to Chinese embassy near Chanakya police station. Then we used to land up in, as we know, all the activist places like prison, things like that. So we used to go to our trusted friend George. And then we always say, please help us. He was at times, he was minister at times, he was member of parliament. Not only he used to listen to us, he always tells his secretary to write a note to the concerned authority. Not only write a note, then he calls himself whether he received the note and Tibetans should be released. Then he will go himself personally, get Tibetans released. At one time, Chinese Prime Minister was here. A lot of Tibetans were arrested. He himself went to the Supreme Court and appealed for the release of Tibetans. When Tibetans were released, he led the march next day. But then the difference, again, about George Fernandes ji was that, again, he's rare. Because when he became the defense minister, his support for Tibetan people remained the same. So normally, once you're in an official position, once you're in government, they shy away a bit. But we could still approach him. He still came, despite a lot of debate within the government, he came to Tibetan events here in Majdunga Tila, Tibetan camp in Delhi. And he received His Holiness Dalai Lama. See, in that sense, he was a true friend. And at that time, he did make a controversial statement also. He said, Pakistan is not our adversary, but China is. And then he came under a lot of pressure within the government for saying that. But again, he did not shy away from saying all these things and doing what he actually believed. Now, he didn't do it out of sympathy for Tibetan people per se. He had sympathy for all the refugees and all the marginalized people around the world. He was similarly concerned with Tamils. In fact, the Burmese activists, as Carl mentioned, when we used to go to meet George Fernandes, Burmese activists were living in his official residence. So he was that engaged and involved as a person, as a leader. In that sense, he was also a true Democrat. And more than that, he really felt that Tibet was and is a core issue for India. He sincerely felt, and he strongly advocated, that after the invasion and occupation of Tibet, China came to the border of India. Hence, we have the longest border dispute between India and China. He sincerely felt that. He sincerely felt that Tibet was vital as an environment for whole of Asia, particularly for India. As we know, the 10 major rivers of Asia flow from Tibet. Indus and Satluj River from India, from Tibet to India to Pakistan. Brahmaputra River from Tibet to India to Bangladesh. Salween and Mekong River from Tibet all the way to Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, all the way to, we know, Vietnam. And Yangtze River and Yellow River. Yellow River, the cradle of Chinese civilization, start from Tibet. So Tibet is a major source of fresh water. And then there are some experts who say that before, wars were fought over land. Nowadays, wars are fought over energy. Soon, wars will be fought over water. And Tibet is the origin of fresh water and 10 major rivers which provide fresh water for more than 1 billion people. And also, Tibet is called the third pole. After Antarctica and Arctic, Tibet has the third highest reserve of ice. The difference being from Antarctica and Arctic, when they melt, it goes to ocean. But as far as Tibet ice is concerned, when they melt, it provides fresh water for all the major rivers. So hence, Tibet issue is not just the issue of 6 million Tibetans. Environmentally, it's an issue for whole of Asia and more than 1 billion people. And geopolitically, it's a major issue because you have the two largest populated countries in the whole world, China and India, facing each other over the border of Tibet. And spiritually, as His Holiness mentioned, Buddhism is one of the most ancient civilizations. And Tibetans can take pride in saying this, and His Holiness always says this, that the best preserved text and teaching of Buddha is in the Tibetan literature now. And India obviously is our guru because we learn Buddhism from India. But Tibetans take great pride in saying that we are the best chelas. And with, yes, disciples. And with His Holiness as our leader and as our teacher, you can clearly see we are the best disciple. So in that sense, George Fernandes truly believed the Tibet issue is not just the issue for Tibetans. It is the issue for India. It is the issue for Asia. It is the issue for the whole world. That's why he was committed till the end. In that sense, he was a true friend, a rare friend, much beloved, and he was a true democrat. People like him are very rare in this world. And today, I think it's a great and important occasion to remember him. And His Holiness Dalai Lama always says, always advises us, always keep your old friends and remember your old friends and make new friends. And George Fernandes will always be a friend of Tibetans, friends of refugees, a friend of marginalized people around the world, and friends of democracy activists around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for these very beautiful words. And now may I invite Dr. Ash Narayan Roy, Director, Institute of Social Sciences, to give a vote of thanks, please.
His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, Dr. Lobsang Sangay, Carl Gershman, Anselo Lee, Melinda de Jesus, Dr. George Matthew, and very distinguished invitees and friends. My task this morning is far from easy. How does one thank someone like the Holiness, who is the embodiment of compassion, peace, and love, as well as a source of happiness for the millions? There is a character in Henrik Ibsen's immortal play, An Enemy of the People, and it says, "The strongest man is the one who stands alone." I think His Holiness is that man who even Gandhiji told us to say no to something which is unacceptable. It is therefore not enough to say thank you. It is amazing how these two words that mean so much can seem so little. The simple phrase of thank you would pale and diminish in sheer enormity of gratitude we owe to His Holiness. We are greatly blessed by His graceful presence and message. We gratefully recall His visit to the Institute in 2010, which Dr. George Matthew alluded to. What a mesmerizing lecture that he gave. All along, it has been his limitless love and his concern for humanity that have guided institutions like ours. His Holiness' life and mission has been one of hope. I thank him for his kind presence and blessings. I must also say just 2-3 lines about Shri George Fernandes, who we know has all along remained a rebel against authority. A knight in shining armor would be the best way to describe him. In the 50s and 60s, he became a household name. He was able to galvanize mass workers, organize radical activism against the establishment. Today, because of his ill health, he may be forgotten by some, but his legacy stands tall. Thanks are due to Dr. Lobsang Sangay for his brilliant speech. I think he indeed deserves where he belongs today. Mr. Carl Gershman is an old friend of the Institute. It is his vision and leadership that has brought NED to where it stands today. We are thankful for his support in organizing this conference. I wish to also express my profuse thanks to Mr. Anselmo Lee and Ms. Melinda de Jesus for their kind support. Let me just take 1 minute of you, since we are here to discuss strengthening democracy. Across Asia, we have the trappings of democracy: elections, parliament, separation of power. But many countries have institutions without authority. As Larry Diamond rightly says, advance of freedom across the world is swinging in the wrong direction. Maybe after the fiesta, the hangover. Democracy is in recession, he says. What is worrying is that this recession is visible in large democracies. Democracy is not about verbal fights or political grandstanding. It is about collaboration and deliberation. This is exactly what we are here. And I believe that it is not just a nudge and wink that will do. It will have to be much more proactive. I'm sure the deliberations over the next 2 days will provide a lot of answers and perhaps leave a lot of questions unanswered. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. We will now break for a tea break for half an hour.